The next time you're shopping for mountain bike gear, check out singletracks.com/deals. Each week, we share our favorite product picks and exclusive coupon codes from our partners. You can also use the page to search for whatever you're buying, from complete mountain bikes to brake sets and tire sealant. That's singletracks.com/deals. And to get our weekly picks delivered to your inbox, be sure to sign up for our newsletter. Links to the newsletter and deals page are in the show notes. Hey everybody, welcome to the Single Tracks podcast. My name is Jeff, and today my guest is Mike Giese. Mike is an industrial designer based in Salt Lake City who has designed products for bike brands like Revel, Trust, and most recently, Evil Bikes. Evil just announced their first electric mountain bike, the Epocalypse, and we're curious to learn about some of the design challenges that were involved. Thanks for joining us, Mike.
Hey, thanks for having me. Definitely appreciate the opportunity, and definitely love the chance to talk shop.
Yeah, right on. So what's your background? How did you get into designing mountain bike products?
Yeah, so I mean, honestly, it's all just kind of fueled by my passion for two wheels, and that goes all the way to my upbringing. I grew up at the start of age 8 racing motocross, and cool. That was definitely very well ingrained in our family. We went to the track every weekend. My brother, my dad, my stepmom, and myself. That was definitely a big part of our lives, and that definitely sparked the flame for that two wheel passion of mine, which has really kind of got me to where I am today. My first kind of hack at actually doing some sort of design work was having the opportunity to get a custom helmet painted when I was at age 11. So my brother and I got some brand new white shiny helmets. We had the chance to sketch up some rudimentary colored pencil designs, and gave those designs to the helmet painter, who was actually like a local dude in town. So sure enough, those helmets came back just as we sketched them, with looked just like the colored pencil drawings. Mine was hot pink with checker flags, slime balls, glitter, gold pinstripes. It was definitely the works, and it was everything that an 11-year-old would want. Then kind of fast forwarding a little bit, that motocross way of life for us transitioned into actually turned pro and started racing the pro ranks at age 16. So I traveled the country racing the AMA Outdoor Motocross Nationals for about 7 years. And, shortly after turning pro, I realized I wasn't really lighting the world on fire by any means. So I started to go to school for engineering. And after a few years of engineering, I switched over to design, ID. Okay. And around the same time of switching to ID from engineering, I kind of got ingrained with just laundry list of injuries from racing motocross, and essentially that burnt me out from the sport. So I definitely left the professional side of racing and focused on school, and also growing my interest in bikes. And more specifically, I was drawn to the downhill mountain biking side of things, just because it's close correlations to racing motocross. And obviously growing up, my brother and myself, we had bicycles, and kind of like any kid, we roamed the neighborhood on our bikes. We built jumps in active construction sites, which probably wasn't the smartest. Even like wandered down to the local skate park and then watch the big kids ride bikes in the bowls and stuff like that. Fast forwarding a little bit, age 16 is kind of when I actually really found mountain biking. I went up to the local bike park, Trestle Bike Park in Colorado. And I brought my hardtail dirt jumper up there, and didn't have a front brake, slick street tires. And as it was very sketchy, it was definitely a hook into the sport for myself. And that's kind of when I realized, I definitely want to be a mountain biker. So at 16 is when that, real transition started hitting. Fast forward to college, after my switch to ID, I switched my mindset from wanting to, be in the moto industry, say an end goal as a entry-level engineer in school was to work for, say, like Pro Circuit Kawasaki, work for the factory team, making cool trick high-end parts in the background. But as my kind of switch to focus to bicycles, switched my focus in career to the cycling and mountain bike industry. This is actually when I kind of stumbled upon Evil. I was searching online for my next mountain bike and saw an Evil Revolt. I was just fascinated by the name, fascinated by the looks of the bike, and just the overall ethos and presence of the brand. And as an eager design student and an aspiring downhill racer, I reached out to the owner, Kevin Walsh, and kind of started our conversation. Essentially led to our friendship down the road.
Cool.
And then after college, I got a start in my career at a small design agency in northern Colorado. We designed products for the outdoor industry, mainly focused on motocross, motorsports, and cycling. So everywhere from moto helmets to mountain bike knee pads to motocross gear to goggles, gloves, anything under the sun that is a wearable piece or a functional piece in the outdoor industry. We definitely had our hands on. So it was pretty cool to get involved in a lot of products outside of the cycling industry.
Yeah.
And then out of the blue, I got connected to Dave Weigel through my friend Kevin Walsh. And Dave was working on this new project, which fast forward was later known as Trust Performance. So I got on board with Trust Performance at the ground level. I was definitely thankful to be working alongside industry legends like Hap Seliga, Jason Shears, Dave Weigel, and a few other of the ground level employees. And it was definitely a super cool experience to kind of be a part of a team that was kind of pushing the bounds of what's acceptable within our mountain bike industry. It's definitely a polarizing product, like as I would agree. Looks and function aside, but it was a good exercise and very cool experience to think outside the box and work alongside, alike individuals who, aren't afraid to, push the bounds and do something different. And following my time at Trust Performance, once again, my good buddy, Kevin Walsh, he lassoed me over and convinced me to move over to the dark side and join Evil. And I was welcomed by the already extremely talented staff that they had. The design team at Evil's always been, badass. Evil's always had great bikes. So I was definitely lucky to join alongside them. And being Evil, what was an end goal of mine ever since I found mountain biking. Like I said, going back to the Revolt days, I was just fascinated by the brand, fascinated by the product, and walking through the doors, first day of work at Evil, it definitely felt pretty surreal. And the rest was history.
Yeah. So is your role at Evil an industrial design role? I noticed you guys have
it is
interesting
correct,
job titles, but essentially you're doing industrial design.
Yeah. So, Evil's a relatively smaller company, so we all wear a lot of hats. So, my job title, it's funny, but it's arts and crafts, so it's basically anything creative, anything under the sun that I can help, advance the business forward. But ID and, frame design is definitely my pinnacle first and foremost skill.
Yeah. Well, so explain to us sort of how industrial designers and engineers work together, because it sounds like you had started out in engineering, studying that, and then moved over to industrial design. So what's the difference? How do those two fit together?
Yeah, totally. So it was actually, kind of beneficial to have that little, getting my feet wet in the engineering side of things and then switching over to ID, because engineers definitely think differently than ID people or, frame designers. But, from the start of the project, obviously this changes case by case, project by project, and, obviously business by business. But the fundamental groundwork of any mountain bike frame project is, laying out the conception of geometry and kinematic.
Okay.
Our engineer, Dave Weigel, he builds out our kind of geometry story and our kinematic based off conversations that we have as a group, surrounding what we want the bike to be, how we want it to ride, how we want it to feel on trail, and the overall experience that we want to give to that customer. Are we trying to give a go fast, plow bike? Are we trying to give a, super playful, enjoyable, fun bike to ride? So these are all kind of stuff that we work with the engineer, Dave Weigel, who does all of our kinematics. These are the conversations that we have to kind of create this bike and this, product story that we want to give to the customer. And once the kinematic is done and dusted, us ID industrial designers, we start laying out the bike of what it's going to look like from an extremely rough standpoint, so super rough, crude silhouette sketches, trying to figure out okay, the top tube's going to dip this low, yada, yada, yada. Mm-hmm. Then we, turn around at the, early stages of that and go back to the engineer and say, hey, how does this work? Is this going to work structurally? Is it going to break? Is it going to, be too stiff, not stiff enough, yada, yada. And then usually, you know, Dave makes some notes on, okay, you know, like, you know, raise this top tube, lower this top tube, you know, the whole 10 yards of trying to make the structure as strong and as, you know, dialed as possible. And then that kind of paints the picture of the box that, you know, we need to play within in terms of ID and making the frame look good. So it is a, you know, very parallel path working with frame designers and engineers alike. You know, it's definitely back and forth and a lot of collaborative effort, you know, across the board.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds like at Evil, and I would imagine other bike brands, sounds like engineering is kind of the start, right? Like there are certain things with the geometry and the way that the suspension's going to work that like those can't be changed. And so that kind of takes the lead.
Agreed.
But I'm sure there's also conversations and like maybe arguments at times about like with the industrial designers coming in and saying something like, oh, we want this to have, you know, super clean look. We want to make like everything internally routed. And then I'm sure the engineers are like, well, yeah, that's going to be tough. And also like, what about when people are working on their bikes? Isn't that going to be a pain? And so, yeah, is there like, how do you kind of decide who wins those arguments? Like, is there somebody who's like the final say on stuff, or like, how do you know who takes the lead?
Yeah, that's definitely a very gray area. Probably, you know, for a lot of other brands as well. It's like, right. Like, you know, usually the ID staff is, you know, has a very love-hate relationship with the engineering staff, right? Like, you know, the engineering staff's very realistic and the ID staff is very, you know, like pie in the sky, like make it look crazy cool, you know? So like it is like definitely, you know, both parties have to swallow their pride and work as a team. And, you know, kind of per topic, you know, the final say party, you know, changes, you know, in terms of aesthetic, obviously, you know, ID has reign. And then in terms of structure and strength, you know, obviously we have to bow down to engineering. So it's definitely a dance, you know, kind of working as a team for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. And I guess there's like varying degrees of that too, from brand to brand. Like a race oriented brand is probably going to be more on the end of like, this thing just has to work and it has to be like, you know, dialed, versus another brand that's like, oh, we just want our stuff to look cool and work well enough.
Exactly.
So, yeah. Interesting. So let's talk about electric mountain bike design and how that's different from traditional mountain bike design. So one of my first questions is like, is it beneficial or even possible to take an existing mountain bike design and just electrify it? Or is it better to start from scratch and say, this is a brand new thing, like let's figure out how it works?
Totally. Yeah. I mean, that's definitely a double-edged sword, you know, so I guess the answer is yes and no. Sure, you can, you know, say, for our example, take our Reckoning frame and throw a motor and battery at it, but it doesn't mean that it'll ride good, you know, the way that we want. We took the approach of rethinking the strategy from the base level for this bike. You know, starting at the ground floor, we based this project off with the simple ethos of building an e-bike around the platform of our ever successful, you know, Evil Reckoning. That's our long travel trail slayer, and we felt like that was the best current platform to kind of base an e-bike from the ground level off of. But, you know, like I said, it's not as simple as just throwing a motor on a traditional bike. We tuned our kinematic, you know, to go alongside with this added weight and, you know, of the added electrical system, you know, while allowing it to get along with our current shock tunes for, you know, spec's sake. So that was definitely a fine balance of, you know, creating this kinematic based around this added weight. That was, you know, the start of the project, and that was the biggest challenge point at the very ground level of this project. And then beyond kinematic, we had to reevaluate the geometry and slightly adjust some of the numbers to better play with, you know, said electrical system and overall packaging concern. The biggest thing was a motor, and that kind of drove our chainstay length out from our, you know, traditional Evil 430 chainstay length to the 442 that's spec'd on our Apocalypse.
Okay.
And, you know, that touched on that chainstay. We're actually quite proud of that 442 number. That's one of the shortest in the, you know, e-bike field with a traditional 29-inch rear wheel e-bike. So it makes our Apocalypse extremely playful to ride and very fun. And it definitely still rides like an Evil, which is, you know, first and foremost in our brain when we were working on this project. Even going deeper, you can't add all that weight on the current tube profile structure of a traditional bike. So we had to rethink every last tube profile on this bike. With the added weight, we engineered and kind of made some new tube profiles to add stiffness where needed and kind of give the added support for the added weight. Touching on the stiffness side of things, that was the biggest goal of this bike. We made it a pretty hard line in the sand to allow this bike to be ridden as hard as its analog predecessors. And we all love to go on long jumps, hucks to flat, the occasional whip that doesn't come back in time, right? Like we all have those up our sleeves for sure. So we wanted to build a bike that could withstand anything that you threw at it. And a big piece of this puzzle was sticking to our Super Boost rear end for the added wheel stiffness. The wider spoke pattern just pairs nice with the added weight. And then we also stuck with a wide main pivot structure, to hopefully stop the bike feeling like a wet pool noodle, when you're riding it hard. So, this bike, definitely you can ride it hard. It rides like an Evil, but it's still, very, very well put together from the tube standpoint and the stiffness standpoint.
So, yeah, I mean, it sounds like the goal was to give this e-bike like a similar ride feel to the Reckoning. But at the same time, it seems like maybe there's an opportunity because this is different, right? You have a motor, you have a battery. And so, I don't know, for me, if I'm on an e-bike, like I ride a little differently, right? Like I'm much more focused on the descents than the climbs. Like the bike probably doesn't have to climb as well as a Reckoning, right? Because you got that added little boost of power. So are there things that are purposely designed to be a little bit different, or was it like we got to make this thing as close to the analog bike as possible?
Yeah, so I mean, I think the biggest thing that was purposely done different than the Reckoning, for example, was the added chainstay length. So most of our geometry is very in line with the Reckoning, minus that added chainstay length, and that was just strictly due to motor packaging. But it was honestly a pretty happy accident. We were all kind of on the fence, like what this 442 chainstay length will feel like on the trail, and we were all pleasantly surprised that still feels like an Evil, still super snappy, super playful, but it can hold a straight line and be extremely stable. So that was the definitely biggest forefront in our minds while bringing this thing from the ground floor was that added chainstay length and what that does to the ride feel.
Yeah. So no thoughts about like making it more slack because you figure people are going to be going downhill more, or worrying about the seat tube angle, for example. Maybe that's not as important, but it sounds like you guys kind of stuck to the same script.
Totally. Yeah. And our like classic geometry story of Evils, like we're not trying to push the bounds of being too long, too slack, like we have very, usable geometry across the globe, right? Like nothing, like we have the stance that when bikes get overly long and overly slack, those obviously work good for steep downhills, but most of the globe and most of the populace doesn't ride overly steep downhills, right? So like we try to make a bike that's extremely fun and playful to ride on any sort of trail, and with that being said, like put our bike on the steepest downhill around and it'll still shine, right? So we feel like we found that secret geometry recipe that works the best of all occasions, and we didn't feel like we needed to kind of dabble in changing that on this e-bike.
Yeah, I mean the chainstays, like you're mentioning, that is huge. I mean, every e-bike that's out there right now, that is a challenge. I mean, they have super long chainstays and they don't feel as playful, and so it sounds exciting that you have potentially this e-bike that rides much more like a regular bike.
Very much so, yeah. Like while you're riding it, it's pretty frequently you kind of forget that you're on an e-bike. That's like how playful and fun it is to ride, and honestly, it is my funnest bike to ride right now.
Yeah, awesome. Well, so Evil's using the Shimano drive system on this bike. Is choosing the drive system one of the first steps, given that you have to kind of design the frame around that?
Totally, yeah. Kind of what you mentioned. We're using the Shimano EP8 drive system, and we paired that with the 630 watt-hour battery. So that's Shimano's biggest battery that they offer at the moment.
Okay.
That was, definitely first and foremost when we were building this bike, because as every third-party motor and battery vendor has a different package volume for their drive unit and the silhouette that comes with that. So first we, say, okay, we're going to use the EP8 system, that like has everything that we want in this bike. And then we take that and build the bike around that, because that's our biggest packaging constraint, is that motor and battery. So that, once you have that silhouette nailed down of like, okay, this is the motor that you're using, you can, place a shock, wherever you want, close to the motor, or, make it play nice with said package. So that was definitely the first step in, picking this bike's motor system for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. So what ultimately made you guys go with Shimano over some of the other systems that are out there?
Yeah, totally. We chose Shimano due to the fact that they have been in the e-bike game for quite some time now. They have a great product, and Evil's had a great relationship with Shimano over the years. We felt it was important, and honestly, our duty to give the customer a platform that was globally supported and backed by a brand like Shimano. Using Shimano allows us to spec a package, from like basically a one-stop shop standpoint. The bike is spec'd with a Shimano head to toe, so it kind of creates a unified experience for the customer of being on a Shimano supplied bike.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. So we talked about, sort of the idea of designing a frame around the battery and the motor. And I'm curious about like some of the strength considerations. A lot of these bikes, like you pull the battery out and it's like, it doesn't look like the thing should even be able to support itself, right? Like it's really thin. Like you basically don't have a continuous carbon tube on a lot of these, right? Like it's kind of just an open cavity. Like how does that work? Like, is that a challenge to design the layup and everything to make that strong enough? Or is it pretty easy to do with carbon?
Yeah, totally. So, yeah, I mean, this like goes back to working with the engineers, right? Like we made the choice to have, an open cavity down tube on our e-bike for like quick battery swaps. Mm-hmm. And, kind of like what you said, it isn't a closed loop down tube. So, the strength obviously is less than, say, a full closed loop, but we, cleverly built the tube profiles, cleverly, work with the factory to build the carbon laminate to, it's just as strong, if not stronger than, say, a full wrap down tube with an integrated battery. So, that, comes back full circle to the engineering side of things. On the start of the project, we kind of picked the road that we wanted to go down with this, open down tube design, and built our frame around that to, kind of optimize that structure to be, full strength with that open down tube and still allow for, quick battery swaps.
Yeah. Yeah, it's pretty crazy because I remember when the Specialized came out with the SWAT system, right? Where there's like a giant hole cut out in the down tube and people are like, whoa, like I didn't know that was possible. This is like that times 4 or something, right? I mean, it's a huge opening and it's like on the underside of the tube. And yeah, it's just amazing the engineering that goes into that and that it's even possible.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's a lot more involved than just say taking a hacksaw and cutting a hole in your down tube, right? Like, there's definitely a lot of man hours in engineering to build that structure that actually accepts a large hole like that in your down tube. And we're definitely stoked with where it landed, and yeah, stoked on the usability of being able to take your battery out in an instant.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about the wiring challenges that are involved in that. Is that pretty similar to internal cable and hose routing when you're figuring out where all these cables go, or is there like additional challenge in figuring that out?
Totally. Yeah, that's a huge pain point in making any e-bike, right? Not just us, that's every company across the board. Yeah, this kind of rat's nest of wires that you have to try to build a nice spot in the frame, right? Like that's just one of the challenges of many of making one of these bikes. And
yeah,
unfortunately, it's not as easy as just throwing some internal carbon guide tubes at it. With the obviously people want the most pinner, tightly packaged frame, but it's a balancing act of needing room for the wiring while keeping the frame, snug to the drive unit and battery.
Yeah.
We're able to package everything in a sleek way that gets the best of both worlds. We built some, internal spaces for wires to sit and dropper tubes to route through, while giving enough tolerance for seat adjust height and usability like that. And the goal was to build a package that was easy for our team in-house to assemble while still looking sleek on the trail. So
yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'm just amazed. I mean, if you've never ridden an e-bike or looked at one, you might just assume like, oh, what? Like you got to run a wire from the battery to the motor and like from the battery to the handlebar. But there's actually a lot of stuff going on there, right? You have like a speed sensor on the rear wheel so that it knows like how fast you're going and all that stuff. So you got to route through the chainstays for that. And then the handlebar itself, most of these, like the Shimano stuff, I believe it's routed through the handlebar, right? The wires, and then they go somewhere.
Yeah. So great touching point there. A notable change on our spec for this Epocalypse is the Evil Energy Bar. This is an Epocalypse specific handlebar with a built-in internal routing for the assist switch. This helps us, keep the cockpit free of wires and looking less like a motherboard on wheels, right? Like we're trying to make a clean, user-friendly experience and not trying to scare people off with a bunch of wires and, stuff coming from the handlebars. So we're definitely excited to launch this Evil Energy Bar to the world.
Yeah. Why is that the wires are routed through the handlebar? I mean, like our brake cables aren't, our shifter cables aren't. Is there a reason why it needs to go through the handlebar? Is that just was that the IDs having their way and like making it just look nice? Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So there isn't a need for it to go through the handlebar, like you can just as easily say like, attach it to the dropper post and run it with that. Just the goal is to attach the assist switch to the computer handlebar next to the stem. So we have felt that, just like our brake cables or our shift cables are in the frame, why not put that wire through the handlebar and make it as clean as possible? So like that was definitely a stylistic choice versus engineering choice on our end. And yeah, we just felt like it was the right direction to go to make the cleanest looking cockpit and product.
Yeah. It does seem like the electrical wires, though, they're definitely much thinner than like a shift cable or a brake hose. And maybe are they prone to like snagging and stuff on the trail? Like, is that a concern at all?
Yes and no. I mean, it's all where you lay it out, right? Like, say your speed sensor, if you route it on the outside of your chainstay, for example, like, of course, you'll be more prone to, grabbing sticks and grabbing stuff as you ride by. But yeah, we definitely made the choice to keep all our wires internal and all of our cables internal, just to have it sleek. For example, you're picking up your bike, you don't want to unplug your speed sensor or your master computer. Like we wanted to keep this as user friendly as possible and as welcoming as possible. So that's why I made the choice to hide all the wires and everything that we could inside the frame discreetly.
Yeah, right on. So how do the build kit considerations differ for an e-bike versus a traditional mountain bike? A lot of us laugh when we see like a new product and we're like, oh, this is an e-bike saddle. And it's like, it's not always clear why the saddle needs to be different for an e-bike, for example. Are there a lot of considerations like that for the build kit?
Yeah, totally. So, I mean, once again, the biggest thing with e-bikes is the added weight to the system. And, with that added weight, you definitely want to spec, stiff wheels, high-end goods, great tires, badass suspension, to help fight against that added weight. Thankfully, on our traditional bikes, we already spec top-of-line wheels, top-of-line suspension, great tires. So we're able to carry over a big portion of our build spec to the Epocalypse, which, obviously makes everything on our back end run more efficient. So we're definitely, made that choice to stick with our, a lot of our carryover parts from our traditional build kits, just because we build our analog bikes to, punch above their weight, which, in fact, works on the e-bike system.
Yeah, that makes sense. It seems like it's also an opportunity to like, some components, they might sacrifice like comfort or durability or something because they're trying to cut weight. Whereas on an e-bike, that's less of an issue because it's already a heavy bike. And also it's doing some of the work for you. So you're like, cool, e-bike, you want to carry this stuff for me? Like, I don't mind an extra, 100 grams on my saddle or tire or whatever, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think like the biggest thing is durability on e-bikes, right? There's like more, power going to the drivetrain, more power going to the brakes. So you definitely want, a burlier chain, for example, or, 4-piston brakes versus, say, if you're on an XC bike, you want 2-piston brakes to, help with weight. So like, yeah, the the weight argument, like it all depends on where you kind of position this bike. If you're building a lightweight, kind of XC styled like microdose e-bike, then you would make lighter weight spec decisions. But we like wanted to build a bike that like you can ride through its paces, ride as hard as you want. Everyone from the base level customer to whatever rampage winning Kurt Sorge can ride the same bike and still have fun on it, right? So we carried over a lot of those same parts that are tried and trusted on our analog bikes.
Yeah. Well, so on the topic of e-bike components, we're seeing a lot of innovation in the components, like in tires and brakes, trickling down to traditional bikes. So companies are, they need a higher spec for e-bikes because of the additional weight. And then riders are finding they like that higher spec stuff because they're riding their traditional bikes harder, and need that same amount of power and durability. Are there similar opportunities when it comes to the frames? Like, are there things that you guys learn from creating an e-bike frame that maybe you can take to the regular bike frames and improve them somehow?
Totally. Yeah. I mean, like go with any product, right? Like every year the bike should be getting better and better, and taking, inspiration at the start of a project from, bikes that are working well, like learning from stuff that isn't working well, and just always like trying to make a better product. But in terms of trickling down to an analog bike, I would bet that, so some of the manufacturing techniques and kind of stiffness strategies will start to trickle down into analog bikes. Stiffness is a big part of making an e-bike. So, that knowledge and strategy will definitely be sprinkled across the board and, to its traditional predecessors. And I mean, there's always endless opportunity for making improvements on the modern day analog bike and e-bike. Honestly, I mean, while we're talking about improvements, like I bet on the e-bike side of things, like stuff will start to get smaller, quieter, more powerful, longer range. Starting to blur the lines from the aesthetic of an analog bike to an e-bike. So I think that's where you'll see the most advancement. But in terms of trickling down to analog bikes, frames, analog frames are so good already, so there's only, the ceiling is semi-capped in my opinion. So I think it's just going to be a balancing act of stiffness and weight at this point. So take some of those stiffness strategies and figure out how to make them lighter for a traditional bike.
Yeah. Interesting. Well, as an industrial designer, I'm curious to know how you make decisions about touch points and usability for stuff like power switches and charging ports, because a lot of this stuff is new, right? Like bikes have been around a long time and the design has evolved, and like we're at a pretty good place where it's like, all right, we know what a bike should look like and how it should work and that sort of thing. But e-bikes, they add some new things. So do you run focus groups and do usability tests, or do you look at what other people are doing, or how do you figure out like how to do something that hasn't really been done, or it's been done, but it's not like established yet?
Totally. Yeah. I mean, as anyone does, we did extensive market research and, internal polling to figure out what people wanted in terms of touch points. We, consciously took the position of trying to make this thing look as discreet as possible. We like buried the power button underneath the top tube, hid the charger port on the non-drive side to try to keep it discreet and hidden during photos. And, touching back to the evil energy bar, we designed a handlebar to hide the cockpit wire. So our end goal was just to make it look less like a calculator on wheels, right? Like, make it look more like a mountain bike, make it more acceptable to the normal mountain bike consumer, and just like get more people interested in the e-bike space.
Yeah. Interesting. Well, yeah, I mean, you've talked a lot about the idea of sort of making this e-bike look and feel more like a traditional mountain bike that we're all used to. I'm curious, with your background in pro moto and also mountain bike racing, where do you see e-bikes fitting? I mean, it seems clear that you see them more as mountain bikes than motorbikes, but are they their own thing possibly too? Like, do you think one day we'll have like a third category where e-bikes look like e-bikes and regular bikes look like regular bikes?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. And honestly, we try to steer away from the correlation between moto and e-bike. We feel that it's honestly unhealthy for the growth of the e-bike sector in our sport. It'll just further delay the adopting of the e-bikes into our local trail systems. I mean, sure, it is a motorized bicycle, but it's still a bicycle, and the rider still has the same joys and experiences as a normal bike, if not more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
While riding the Apocalypse, you're under no illusion that you're riding a motorcycle. You have all the same joys, same self-expressions of riding a normal bike, and all while doing 3 times the laps. So you're just out there for longer, having the same amount of fun, if not more. And a big negative side or negative outlook on e-bikes is the workout side of things. So it's like if you want more of a workout, it's just all how you ride it. You can burn some more calories by switching over to, say, trail or eco mode to get those legs burning even more.
Yeah,
it's just so much more of an experience of just twisting the throttle like a motocross bike. So we're definitely taking the stance of we don't want to correlate riding an e-bike same as riding a motorcycle. We're definitely trying to push the side of the argument that like this is still a bicycle. It's just a different experience, and it just gets more people out on the trails.
Yeah. I mean, that makes perfect sense to me. And yet there's still so many traditional mountain bike riders who are adamant that like you add a motor to a bike, it's a motorcycle. But it's pretty clear once you see one, once you ride one, that it is closer, much, much closer to a mountain bike than a motorbike. And I mean, is there an analog though? Like, are there products out there that are essentially electric motorcycles? I mean, like, I haven't done a lot of research, but there's like the Cake brand, right? That like
for sure. Yeah, there's like products
does more of an electric motorcycle.
Exactly. Yeah, there's some products that were starting to blur the lines a little bit. Like for example, the Sur-On bike. That's like definitely making a insurgence in the mountain bike audience, just because it's roughly close to the size of a mountain bike. It has say a mountain bike fork and shock, and like price point's definitely low, and I think they're going across kind of going after that like mountain bike customer. So yeah, touching on the Sur-On, the Cake, and probably a few others out there. There's definitely some products that are blurring the lines. Yeah, so it's definitely a balancing act of like, we definitely want to separate ourselves from, say, a full power twisted throttle, electric product. This is definitely still a bicycle.
Yeah. Yeah, it makes sense what you're saying too, that like, as long as these electric mountain bikes that are being built are designed to look and feel like a mountain bike, like that's what keeps them in that realm, right? Like
For sure.
As soon as we start making it, like giving it its own sort of aesthetic and, design consideration, then it becomes a separate thing that we're like, how do we regulate this? Where can you ride it? Like, but,
For sure.
But if we're keeping it sort of in that mountain bike realm, going forward, then I think that makes sense.
For sure.
So who do you see as the target customer for electric mountain bikes like the Apocalypse? Is it geared more toward experienced riders, or do you think this is going to appeal to folks who are maybe new to the sport?
Yeah, I mean, our target audience is very open-ended. I mean, we didn't build a bike that's good for one sole target audience, but rather build it in extension of our brand and our brand ethos, which is getting people on the trails, having fun on your bicycle. That's the end goal. That's all why we do it. The Apocalypse is welcoming to, say, everyone from a newly found mountain biker, all the way up to, like I said before, the Rampage winning Kurt Sorge, right? Like we built a bike that can handle anything and everyone that you throw at it, while still being user friendly to the base level consumer.
Yeah.
Definitely don't want to, position our products as, experienced rider products or high end. I mean, not high end, they are high end, but we don't want to position them as like, you have to be an experienced rider to ride an Evo bike. Definitely want to be welcoming and inclusive to everyone. And, that all kind of goes back to how we, tried to hide a lot of the electrical components and hide the wires and make it look friendly for, everyone from that base level consumer to the experienced mountain bike veteran.
Yeah. It's interesting because, the electric bikes that I've ridden, I have a hard time imagining like someone who's brand new, like getting on one and being able to ride it. Right. Like, and also the cost, right? Like that's a big investment to make if you're like, I'm new to this mountain biking thing. And to me, it kind of, you hear a lot of people that are concerned, right? That there are these people who are going to like never ridden a bike before and they're going to buy an e-bike and they're going to go to their local trails and they're going to, not know the rules of the trail and they're going to like cause all kinds of problems. And I just have a hard time imagining that happening? Because it seems unlikely that someone's going to, like, for their first bike, they're going to buy one of these. I mean, do you see that at all? Or do you really think that this is something that, like, I don't know, people could somehow start out with?
Yeah, I mean, like, obviously this is our first e-bike, so it'll definitely be a learning curve of, like, who's going to buy this thing. But
yeah,
I would tend to agree with you that this most likely won't be someone's very first mountain bike. Due to the price point and the complexity of an e-bike. But say, for example, if there's an entry level rider who has a analog bike, this would definitely be a welcomed addition to their fleet.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's definitely going to be interesting to see who our target audience is with this bike, and who our real customers are. But just like any evil bike, we're, like, trying to sell our brand and our inclusivity to our brand, right? Like, being a part of evil, being an evil owner, people take pride in that. It's really cool to see people's passion in our brand and in our product.
Yeah, it definitely seems like a great bike for, I mean, replacing your trips to the bike park almost, right? Like, you can just pedal this thing up some pretty nasty climbs, and then just have fun taking it down.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, like, during our testing phase, like, we have this kind of one of our test spots close to Bellingham. It's a pretty nasty shuttle road. And, like, we took the e-bikes out there, and, like, we can actually pedal up, obviously going a different way than just riding the road, but we can pedal up quicker than we can shuttle, So it's like, it's basically like a self shuttle. If you're solo, you don't have any friends to ride with, but you still want to go to your local shuttle spot, you can, bring the e-bike out and pound some laps. Or, if you're crunch for time on an after work ride, you can put it in boost mode and blast up the hill to catch that last bit of light for the trail down. And there's just so many different use cases for these e-bikes. It's so much more than just being lazy with a motor under your feet. Like, there's so many different use cases, and it's definitely cool to see that story come to life and tell that story.
Yeah, for sure. Well, Mike, thanks so much for telling us about e-bike design and a little bit about the Epocalypse. Sounds like a really awesome bike, and I'm sure people are going to be stoked to learn more about it.
Totally, yeah. I mean, thanks for having me on the show. Definitely a big fan of what you guys do with this podcast. For sure, an avid listener. So, thanks for having me on board, talking shop. It's always fun, and looking forward to seeing what people think of this bike.
Yeah, awesome. We can get more info about the bike at evil-bikes.com. And you can also check out some of Mike's other work at mikegiese.com. We'll have both of those links for you in the show notes. That's all we've got this week. We'll talk to you again next week.